Okay, welcome back everybody. My name is Sucker and I have not done a rant video on this channel in a while. And today I definitely have some thoughts about the NBA MVP race and some pretty strong thoughts that I'm going to share with you guys. But really quickly before we get started, if you enjoy the NBA, then you should consider subscribing because this is the 100th consecutive day that I've uploaded a NBA video on this channel. So if you enjoy the NBA, you enjoy that level of consistency, then consider subscribing. Okay, here we go. So the NBA MVP race as of a week and a half ago was not a race. There was no contest. Giannis Antetokounmpo over the entire season had been the best player in the league and had been the MVP of the league. He was the best player on the best team by far record-wise. He'd been putting up incredible production, whether it be per minute or throughout an entire game. And there wasn't an angle, there wasn't an argument in which you could start to make a case that any player in the entire league deserved the award more than Giannis. And it wasn't particularly close, okay? About a week and a half ago, coincidentally, right before a huge weekend for the Lakers in which they played both the Clippers and the Bucks, this conversation started to come up about, hey, maybe we should pay a little bit more attention to LeBron in this MVP argument, right? That wasn't necessarily incorrect. Maybe we were overlooking LeBron, but to introduce him at that point as a legitimate potential winner for the MVP made little to no sense. At that point in time, Giannis was clearly the guy, and it wasn't really all that close, right? But conveniently, about a week and a half ago, before this huge weekend for the Lakers, this conversation started, and it started on talk shows, it started on ESPN, it started on TNT, it started in general, right? And this was the most concerted media effort I've ever witnessed for one player to win a particular award. Not necessarily that they want him to win it, but that they want it to be a conversation, which makes complete sense, right? Because this time of the year in the NBA, there's only a handful of things you can really focus on. The award races, maybe some All-NBA stuff, the race for the 8th seed in the Western Conference. The race for the 8th seed in the Eastern Conference is pretty much non-existent. It's the Nets and the Magic trying to figure out who's going to lose in the first round in the 7 and the 8. And there's just not a lot of things to talk about, right? Because to be completely honest, like 40% of the league is either not trying because they're conserving themselves for the postseason, or they're not trying because they're trying to tank and get a bad record, right? So there's this part of the year, there's just not a ton of things to talk about. So if you're eliminating the MVP race from that pool of topics, it gets pretty tough to talk about the NBA this time of year on a daily basis, as people on ESPN have to do. So this conversation started, again, conveniently, coincidentally, right before the Lakers had this big weekend against the Bucks and the Clippers. And credit to them and to LeBron himself. LeBron played incredible in both of those games, and the Lakers in general had a huge weekend, got 2 huge wins, and established themselves as probably the championship favorite for this season. However, suddenly, those 2 games out of 60-something that have been played to this point, and out of 82 that will be played in an entire NBA regular season, somehow those 2 games completely flipped the narrative of an 82-game award. And that is my issue here. LeBron James has had an incredible season. There's no doubt about that. You cannot argue whether you're grading on a curve for someone that's 35 years old or just in general. The way that he has played to this point in the season, the production that he's put up, the team success of that Lakers team has been incredible. I'm not discrediting that in any way. But before this past weekend, there was zero argument that you could have made from any angle that LeBron James had a more MVP-worthy season than Giannis Antetokounmpo, right? From a statistical production standpoint, whether it's per minute or throughout an entire game. From a team success standpoint, the Bucks have had the best record in the league the entire season by a pretty wide margin. The on-off splits, both teams are significantly better with their best players on the floor, and they're worse without them on the floor, but the margin between those 2 numbers is really not that big of a deal. There's really not much of a difference between LeBron being on the floor and Giannis being on the floor in terms of how well their teams play, and certainly not a big enough difference in terms of anything of significance to make a big argument for LeBron. There wasn't an angle. Suddenly, after those 2 games, there's an angle, right? And it's being thrown in our face that LeBron is the MVP, LeBron is the MVP, LeBron is the MVP. And it's just ridiculous. At this point, March 11th, even as great as LeBron and the Lakers were this past weekend, there still isn't much of an argument. Like, there's a scenario in which LeBron can win MVP that I'll get to later. But right now, if we're voting today, there's like a 5% chance that LeBron would win the MVP if we voted today. If we're voting in an unbiased sense and there's certain media members that aren't included and you're just voting off of who had the best season, it's still Giannis. It's still an 82 game award, or in this case, a 60 something game award. And the only edge that LeBron has over Giannis at this point is the narrative, right? This guy's 35 years old. And this Lakers team wasn't all that good last year, and he's really turned it on. He's been incredible over the last couple of weeks and throughout the entire season. He just went up against two of the better teams in the league head-to-head and looked like the best player in both of those games. All of those are narratives from 2 games. But the statistical production, the team's success, all of the stuff we should be basing our MVP votes off of, all of those things throughout the entire season are heavily, I'm not overstating this, heavily in favor of Giannis. And so what bothers me here is that we're feeding into this, and that some people are starting to say, oh, of course LeBron's the MVP. Of course he's had a better season. When a week and a half ago, before anybody else was bringing it up, before the media was bringing it up, before ESPN, TNT, the NBA as a whole was bringing up this conversation as LeBron is the MVP, a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago, nobody would have said that LeBron was the MVP. And now there's this huge contingent of people that are saying that it's a conversation when it's not. It's still not. Even after an incredible weekend, it simply isn't a case. Giannis is still the MVP. Now, there is a scenario in which LeBron wins the MVP, and I really wouldn't have an issue with it. If Giannis misses the rest of the season and the Lakers continue to play incredible and they're within 4 to 5 games of the Bucks in the win column, I'm okay with having a legitimate conversation about a coin flip case between Giannis and LeBron simply because of the games missed, because the record isn't that big of a difference, and you can start to make the case that LeBron is simply a better player and at times more valuable for the Lakers. That is a case that I'm okay with. But what I'm not okay with is allowing all of these other people to shape the argument that wasn't an argument 2 weeks ago, right? If this was a real thing 2 weeks ago, I would have no issue with it. But the only reason this became a conversation is because certain people wanted it to be, and they wanted there to be more interest in the league, which generally is a good thing. But when you're talking about something as historically significant as an MVP award, I don't think that that's something that we should be allowing ourselves to be so easily swayed by some drummed up narrative that, by the way, as of today, still isn't true. As of today, LeBron still isn't the MVP. There's just no way that you can convince me out of anything outside of a narrative that LeBron deserves to be the MVP. And those narratives are ones that were created by the media that wants this to be more of a conversation. So I don't think that we should be pushing ourselves to give LeBron this MVP based off of something that we ourselves were not thinking about 2 weeks ago. There's no way it can change that quickly. The odds of him winning the MVP can change that quickly, but when it's such a large gap, it can't suddenly be the other way. And now, as of today, LeBron is the MVP. That doesn't sit right with me. And I've seen some of the most, I don't want to use the word stupid because I think people can get very passionate about this stuff and they can really talk themselves into arguments that don't make a ton of sense. But I've seen some of the most ridiculous arguments on Twitter and in videos and stuff this week about this LeBron for MVP thing. I even saw somebody making the case that because LeBron plays more minutes per game, he deserves to be the MVP over Giannis. Who in their right mind would use that as an argument? If you want to say that LeBron carries his team more because he plays more minutes, that's a stretch, but I guess you could go there. But Giannis and LeBron have nothing, zero to do with how many minutes they're on the floor. That is a Mike Budenholzer thing and their coaching staff, and then that is a Frank Vogel thing and their coaching staff and how many minutes they want to have their guys on the floor. And you could argue that it's a much smarter approach for Giannis to be playing less minutes than LeBron has been playing, and that's not as smart of an approach. But the fact that LeBron's playing more minutes and is still statistically less productive than Giannis in those minutes can't be an MVP argument. It just can't. And that's one of the examples of people shaping their argument around a narrative that they already believe in, that they've been not necessarily forced to believe in, but has been thrown in our face for the last 2 weeks. And people were starting to shape these things around this idea of LeBron as MVP. They start at, this guy needs to win the MVP because I've been told for the last 2 weeks that he actually is more deserving than Giannis, which isn't true. But they start there and then they come up with their argument and say, hey, look, he's playing more minutes per game. He's 35 years old. You should be grading on a curve. Look at all these narratives. He needs to win his 5th MVP to be on pace with all these other guys historically. That's just not the way to do it, in my opinion. You can do whatever you want in terms of how you want to choose your MVP. For me, that's just a ridiculous approach. To start with the player and then come up with the argument doesn't make any sense to me. So, like I said, I don't want to discredit LeBron's season. He's had an outstanding season. And there is a scenario in which LeBron can win the MVP and it absolutely be deserved and it not be this thing that the media just drummed up. And if this conversation had never started 2 weeks ago and Giannis still gets hurt and Giannis still misses the rest of the season and LeBron still plays as incredible as he has been lately, you would have been able to make that case for LeBron as MVP at the end of the year without this completely undeserved conversation that we've been having over the last 2 weeks. So at the end of the day, I get it, and I understand wanting to praise LeBron's greatness as a basketball player. I don't think that we should allow ourselves to be shaped so easily by an argument that was only brought up to drum up interest and really was illegitimate up until a couple of days ago, right? So at the end of the day, my frustration here is that we're allowing other people to form an argument for us, and then as a whole, more and more people start to latch onto an argument that wasn't even theirs to begin with, and it creates a conversation that should have never existed in the first place. And I'm still saying that as of today, as of March 11th, 2020, Giannis is the MVP and LeBron is a candidate, but it's not particularly close still. And there are scenarios that can change down the road that allow LeBron to be the MVP. But for me, right now, it's kind of ridiculous that this conversation has even happened over the last 2 weeks. And if you think that LeBron is the MVP today, I guess I don't really know what to tell you, and I don't understand how you can come to that conclusion based off of an objective argument rather than this convoluted group of narratives that only serve the purpose to lift up LeBron's case while not using that same criteria to compare him to Giannis, where I think there's plenty of narratives there as well that simply aren't being brought up. So that's my rant about the NBA MVP race. And yeah, there you have it. That is the end of today's video, and I thank you all very much for watching. Once again, my name is Sucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.